guys, and welcome back to another video. So today's video I'm doing another movie review, and it's a bit late, but I'm finally reviewing Spider-Man Homecoming. So Spider-Man Homecoming was the first Spider-Man solo film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and it did come out nearly a year ago now, so I am a tad bit late reviewing it. But if you were subscribed to my channel last year, you will know how much I loved this film. I went and saw it at the cinema 5 times. 2 of those times was in London, once in IMAX 3D, the other time at a private screening with Tom Holland himself. I've never seen a film in the cinema that many times, so this film is definitely one of my favourite films of all time. It's right up there with my favourite MCU films. I absolutely love it, and I couldn't not review it. I've just been so busy the past year, I haven't had time to do the review until now. So obviously I absolutely loved this film. So Spider-Man Homecoming was a big deal because it was the first solo Spider-Man film in the MCU after the Marvel Cinematic Universe got the rights for Spider-Man back, because originally Sony had them, and this was the 3rd reboot of Spider-Man. We had Tobey Maguire first in that trilogy, and then we had the 2 Amazing Spider-Man films with Andrew Garfield, and now we had Tom Holland as Spider-Man in Spider-Man Homecoming. So we saw Spider-Man first in Captain America Civil War. Everyone loved him, I loved him, and we were very excited after that to see him in his own film. So the film started to a flashback from around the first Avengers film. We were introduced to Adrian Toomes, who was the bad guy of this film, and we saw him working, having to clear up the mess after the New York fight with the Chitauri, and then obviously he got kicked out of the job because these other people came in, and it kind of set the scene and showed us exactly why Adrian Toomes was going to do what he did to become the bad guy in this film. So that was pretty cool. And then we had the Marvel intro, which they play at the start of every Marvel film, but in this Marvel intro the music for it was the 1967 cartoon Spider-Man theme, which was so awesome because it's the classic Spider-Man theme that everyone knows. And hearing that play in the cinema right before this Spider-Man film, it was the coolest thing ever. Everyone in the cinema, every time I went to see the film, you could hear the buzz of excitement when this started playing. So the first 10 minutes of this film was actually through Peter Parker's point of view, through a vlog that he made when he went to help during Civil War. And as someone who makes vlogs and films vlogs, I absolutely loved this scene so much, and I definitely appreciated it because that, like, it was relatable. That is me. That was me when I went to London to meet Tom Holland. That is me whenever I vlog anything. I'm just like that. And so seeing this character, this superhero, doing something that I do, it was the coolest thing, and I loved it so much, and it was so funny, and it really sets the film. Right there it tells you that this Spider-Man is only 15 years old, he's a teenager, he's a kid, and this is the sort of thing that we're going to be getting in this film, is someone who is just a kid and he's going to be acting like one. So we got to see kind of Peter balancing his life between Spider-Man and school and all that, and it was just so nice to finally see a Spider-Man who was like the right age. Because although Andrew Garfield Spider-Man went to high school, did he look like he was that age? No. Tobey Maguire definitely wasn't a teenager, and one of the reasons everyone loves Spider-Man so much from the comics is because he is just a teenager, and he is the same age as a lot of the Marvel fans, which makes him more relatable and that sort of thing. And so we finally got the perfect representation of that in this film, and it was really awesome getting to see him having to do homework, having tests at school, but also trying to be a superhero and trying to balance everything. It was so cool to see that. And it was during this montage we got the Stan Lee cameo, and that bit was really funny. And also during this part of the film we were introduced to the principal of Midtown School of Science and Technology, and fun fact was the guy who played the principal also played one of the Howling Commanders in Captain America First Avenger, and there was a photo of said Howling Commander in his office, and like, because the principal is actually, I think it's the grandson of this Howling Commando, so that was a cool little way to kind of connect this to the MCU and some previous films that we've had. So that was a cool little Easter egg. So quite early on into this film, Ned, Peter's best friend, finds out that he's Spider-Man. We knew this was gonna happen because they released a clip of it and it was in the trailer. I think it would have been cool if they hadn't told us that was gonna happen before going in to see the film, but even though we'd already seen it, it was still so hilarious and so funny. One little detail I did notice was when Peter went into his house through the window and was crawling on the ceiling, his ceiling was really dirty party and had loads of marks on it, and that shows that he must obviously crawl on his ceiling quite a lot. So that was a cool little detail that they added in there just to kind of show exactly what Peter does as Spider-Man. Ned finding out, fanboying a bit and asking all these questions again shows that they are just teenagers. It was so awesome when he was like asking, do you lay eggs? And then Pete was like, no, and stuff like that. It was great. So another thing I worked out is Ned in the comics is actually the Hobgoblin, which is one of Spider-Man's villains, and that is interesting that his character has the same name as this bad guy in the comics, and it also leads to the question as to maybe in a future Spider-Man film, is Ned going to go evil? Is he going to become the Hobgoblin? I mean, having seen Homecoming, I can't imagine that happening to Ned, but you never know. So it would be interesting to see if they bring that into it and make him the Hobgoblin somehow. So this is the first Spider-Man film on the third reboot. However, it isn't an origin story. All the other Spider-Man films we've gotten, the first film in the series has been an origin story where they show how Pete got bitten by the spider, Uncle Ben died, he became Spider-Man, all that fun stuff. But in this reboot, they don't show us that. We just have to assume that it happened. But there are some nods to it. For example, when talking about Aunt May, Peter says something along the lines of not with what she's been going through. And this is obviously a nod to Uncle Ben, because we know from Civil War that Peter has only been Spider-Man for 6 months. So it's obviously still an ongoing thing. They're probably still grieving. And so that was a nod to Uncle Ben's death and how it must have affected Aunt May and stuff. So that was a little nod to that in there. So we get the scene where Pete and Ned go to the party, and there's that scene in the car where Pete sees the party and then he turns to Aunt May and is like, this was a mistake, maybe we shouldn't go. And it's like, that scene actually generally upset me quite a lot because it's relatable. Because as a teenager, going to a party where there are lots of teenagers is the most stressful thing. I've only been invited to one party, and I mean, to start with, I was very nervous because there were a lot of people there I didn't know and I felt like I could get judged. I mean, then I had alcohol and I mean, it was a different story. But as someone who doesn't really like people or leaving the house, it was very relatable to see his character get nervous about going to this big event where there'd be lots of people, because that's exactly what happens to me. If I have to go somewhere where there's a lot of people and I don't know them and I don't know what to do, I do get very nervous, and it's something that I think a lot of teenagers experience with parties and that sort of thing. And it was cool to see that in a character, someone I can relate to and that sort of thing. So the party scene was very funny. Ned is great when Peter was like, just be yourself, and then Ned was like, no one wants that, and then Pete's like, dude, like, that was really funny. Ned has some great lines in this film. It's very awesome. But Pete goes to the party and then he gets distracted and ends up Spider-Manning to go and stop these weapon dealers, and there is that scene where he's running through the suburbs and he tries to shoot a web, but there's nowhere for his webs to connect to, so he has to run across this suburb, which is funny because this has been the thing that everyone's always like, okay, but surely there isn't always something for Pete to web onto so he can swing, and they perfectly showed this. And the second that happened, it made me think of that GIF. If I can find it, I'll insert it here, but there is a GIF that constantly goes around on Tumblr of Spider-Man trying to shoot a web and it doesn't work because he's like in the middle of nowhere, and it just made me think of that GIF, and it was so perfect. It was great. So Pete goes to DC with the decathlon team, and one interesting little thing that they had whilst they were on the bus on the way, there was a sign that said something along the lines of Triskelion clear up or something like that, which was a nod to Captain America Winter Soldier. So they're still actually clearing up from what happened at the end of Winter Soldier when all the helicarriers got destroyed and that sort of thing. So even though this probably happens quite a few years after Winter Soldier, they are still clearing up from it, which is pretty interesting. So Pete hacks into this new suit which Tony gave him, and this suit's pretty cool. It's got loads of different web combinations and loads of different things that you can do on it, but one thing it does have is insta-kill. Okay, Tony, so a suit that you're giving to a 15-year-old has insta-kill. Why would you even build that into a suit? I'm pretty certain Tony doesn't want to be killing the bad guys. The Avengers are all about stopping them but not killing them. Why would Tony build insta-kill into a suit he's planning to give to a 15-year-old? Like, why would he do that? Even if it was originally disabled, why does that feature even exist? Tony, I need answers. So that was very interesting. It was funny though. Like, but I have seen a lot of theories going around that if Tony gets hurt or killed in Avengers Infinity War or Avengers 4, out of rage and grief, Pete's gonna activate insta-kill, and that could happen, and that would be interesting. So another fun little little fact is the person who voices Karen, the voice inside Pete's suit, is actually the wife to the guy who voices Jarvis. So that's a little cool thing, the fact that all these AI voices are actually married in real life. So we get the scene where Pete has to save all his friends at the Washington Monument. That scene was so cool, seeing Pete having to try and climb up the Washington Monument, and then he's like really scared of the height. He uses the wings, he's got the web wings, the gliders, it's so cool, and he saves them, and that scene was really awesome. And the news report afterwards was really funny with the teacher when he was like, we can't lose a student, not again. The fourth time I went to see Spider-Man Homecoming in the cinema, this was when I saw it with Tom Holland at a private screening. My whole family were with me, so this was the first time my mum was seeing it, and when the teacher said not again, my mum turned to look at me, clearly slightly concerned about him saying that. It was so funny. So then we have the interrogation scene where Pete tries to interrogate this guy. So Donald Glover's character in this scene mentions having a nephew in the neighborhood, and if you know about the comics and stuff, this nephew he's talking about is actually Miles Morales, who is a version of Spider-Man in the comics. So that was a really cool nod to him, and it means that Miles Morales exists in the MCU, so it would be so cool if we got him in one of the future MCU films. So then there's the scene on the ferry where Pete tries to stop them, and then Vulture shows up and it doesn't end well, and then he's trying to save everyone on the ferry and that also doesn't end well, and wow, that scene was so stressful to watch. Again, Pete's only a kid. I mean, he literally says yoink when he takes the keys off a guy, like what? He really did try to save everyone, but it didn't quite go to plan, and then Iron Man showed up and had to save the day. And I really liked how they had Tony in this film. I was skeptical to start with because I was worried it would become an Iron Man film rather than a Spider-Man film, but actually Tony wasn't in it that much, and what he was in it did help to the story and add to Pete's character and that sort of thing, so it was pretty cool. But then we get the scene where Tony takes the suit away from Pete, being a dad basically. He gives very valid points saying, you know, if you're nothing without that suit, you shouldn't have it and that sort of thing. But one thing that I really didn't like about this scene is the fact that he takes the suit away from Pete. Pete doesn't have anything else to wear, and then Tony's like, we'll sort something out, and then Pete walks home and he's in this oversized like New York City tourist t-shirt, and you don't see it in the film, but we know from set pics that he's also wearing Hello Kitty pajama bottoms. These are clearly clothes that were probably found in the trash or something. Like, Tony Stark, billionaire, couldn't get Pete decent clothes to walk home in, so he had to walk home in bright pink Hello Kitty pants. Like, how humiliating is that? Was that really necessary, Tony? Was that really necessary, humiliating Pete by making him walk home in all these clothes when he's already upset enough? Couldn't you just go into like even a charity shop and buy some cheap clothes that actually look decent for Pete? Surely you could have done that. You can afford it, Tony. Why didn't you do that? So I don't think that was very fair for Pete having to wear those clothes. And Tony with Pete in general, I'm not the biggest fan, because in Civil War, Tony actually uses Pete big time. He uses him, and it's really annoying because when he goes to Pete to ask him to help fight in Berlin, he doesn't tell Pete what Team Cap are fighting for. He doesn't explain the Accords to him. He doesn't tell them both points of the argument. He just tells him that Captain America is wrong, and because Pete's 15 and he looks up to Iron Man and this is Tony Stark, of course he's gonna believe him. Of course he's gonna think that Tony's right, and he's gonna go into that battle and start fighting Captain America believing he's the bad guy, when actually in reality the Accords would probably go against Pete hiding his identity as Spider-Man. So in reality he probably wouldn't agree with the Accord, so really Pete could be on Team Cap. He just doesn't know that because Tony doesn't tell him everything. He just tells him Captain America's wrong, making sure that Pete's gonna be on his side. He uses him. He straight up uses Peter to help fight on his side because he knows Peter will listen to anything he says. So he uses that and tells Peter that he's the right one and that Cap's wrong, so he needs to fight Cap. But really, Pete's old enough that he would have had his own opinion on the Accords, and fair enough, it could have been with Team Iron Man and he could have fought on Tony's side without problem, but you never know, he could have been on Team Cap in the end. He just didn't know because Tony didn't tell him anything and Tony used him in that fight, and I will forever be salty at Tony for that. So all that drama aside, Pete goes back to living his normal life at school. He manages to ask Liz to homecoming, and then he has to get ready for homecoming, and that montage is the purest of the pure. But then we get the major plot twist in this film. He goes to pick up Liz, and who should open the door? Adrian Toomes. Turns out the Vulture is Liz Allen's father. I did not see that coming. Oh my goodness, that was crazy. The first time I saw the film, the second he opened the door, like, oh my god, I completely freaked. And we just find out that he's her dad. Oh my god. Every time I saw the film, when he opened the door and Adrian Toomes was the other side, loads of people in the cinema gasped. Again, when my mum watched it for the first time, she was sat next to me when he opened the door. She looked at me completely shook. It was so funny. And the cinema just goes completely silent the second he opens the door. The tension really builds up to the point that when Liz's mum walks in, it actually makes people jump. It never made me jump, but when I watched it with my mum, I saw her jump when Liz's mum walked in. So they built up the tension so much in that scene that the Liz's mum walking in was a major jump scare for some people. But this scene in the house ended up being quite funny because obviously Pete was just there kind of eyeing the dad, and it was really awkward, and then he wasn't smiling in the photos, and it was actually really funny. But then we go to the car scene and the atmosphere completely changes, and it goes from one where we're all laughing to this situation to suddenly we're like, oh, and it's not funny anymore. Interestingly, this car scene was more intense the second time I saw the film. I don't know why that was, but like, you know, there are still some little funny bits in this car scene, like when Pete looks at the thing on Liz's phone and he's like, oh, and then he goes back to a completely straight face. And also when he's talking about Spider-Man and he's just like, hey, he's a pretty solid dude. That got little chuckles out of the audience, but because of the awkward atmosphere, no one properly laughed. And that scene was so intense, and oh my goodness, I just wanted to hug Peter the whole time because he looked like he was going to cry. He literally looked so scared, and oh god. And you know, and it was really cool to see Adrian actually working out that Pete is Spider-Man. You could just see him slowly putting it together until he was like, yeah, okay, he's Spider-Man, and then he got the gun out. Oh my goodness, that scene, it was so intense and it was crazy. Pete goes to homecoming. Loved the bit when Michelle gives him the middle finger. That was hilarious. But obviously he looks like he's gonna cry. He looks so lost, and then he decides to go after Adrian. You know, he tells Ned so that Ned can help him. He ends up having to fight the Shocker first, and one funny thing about this scene is there's a bit where the Shocker hits him and he goes into a bus and he crashes into all the bus seats. I couldn't take that bit seriously because on Instagram before the film came out, Tom Holland posted a video of him recording a sound effect for the film, and that sound effect was this sound effect for Peter getting knocked into all these seats. And the second I heard it, I recognized it from the video. And when you know how the sound effect is made, it really does change the way you watch this film. I'll insert the clip here.
Gross. Gross.
So the second I heard it, I was like, that's the bit that Tom put on his Instagram. They literally filmed that by shaking him. That's hilarious, and it took me out of the film for a second. But as someone who wants to be an actor, someone who's very interested in all the behind the scenes stuff, I didn't mind because it was really cool to actually see that they took this and managed to make it this sound effect that sounded realistic. It was very interesting. But Ned saves Pete. That was awesome. And then Ned's the guy in the chair. It was great. And Ned in the scene was absolutely hilarious, especially when he gets caught and the teacher asks him what he's doing and he's just like, I was watching porn. That line, when I went to see Homecoming in IMAX 3D, that line got the biggest laugh out of the entire film. It was absolutely hilarious, and you gotta love Ned. It was great. But yeah, so Pete steals Flash's car, ends up finding where Adrian's gone, and then we get that scene. So before I went to see Homecoming, people who had already seen it on Twitter were tweeting about that scene, and they'd always call it that scene so as not to give away spoilers. And it was one of those things that if you've seen the film, you know exactly what they're talking about. And so as I was watching the film, I was trying to work out what that scene was. Originally I thought it could be the scene in the car when Vulture works out that Pete's Spider-Man, but then that scene happened, and as soon as it did, I was like, yeah, this is that scene. This is that scene that everyone's referring to. It did make me cry, and that is the scene when Pete gets all the rubble on him, and then he has this major freak out, and he's like, someone help, you know, all that stuff, before he eventually realizes that he needs to do something, and he manages to get the rubble off him when he's all like, come on Spider-Man, and that sort of thing. And seeing him trapped in that rubble and freaking out, calling for help and stuff, that's the bit that made me cry. And that's the bit where you really do see he's only 15, he's a teenager, and he just got stuck under all this rubble and there's no one's to help him, and he's freaking out, and that's where you really see exactly how young and vulnerable he is. And I think it showed a lot about his character, because even Spider-Man gets scared, even Spider-Man doesn't always know what to do and that sort of thing, but then him getting past it and getting himself out was some major character development, and that scene was absolutely incredible. And Tom Holland's acting was insane. Honestly, that guy is incredible, and oh god, that scene, it will forever haunt me. It was so heartbreaking, but it was so amazing, and oh, it was so good. So he gets out and then he finds Adrian, and then we get the end fight, and it's like on the plane, and then they crash onto the beach and they keep fighting, and this whole fight sequence, it was so cool. It was really interesting. There were like still funny moments in it when he was like on the plane, like he's like, I'm on a plane fighting my girlfriend's dad. You asked her to homecoming, you didn't ask her to be your girlfriend. I don't think she classes as a girlfriend yet, Peter, sorry. You know, the end fight was so intense, especially since you'd just seen Pete having this major freak out, and you were like, yeah, he's vulnerable, he doesn't know what he's doing, this is the biggest fight he's ever had to do. So it was very intense, it was crazy, it was amazing, and he really did take a beating, but he didn't give up. And again, it showed us a lot about his character. Like, this is one tough 15-year-old. He's gonna be an amazing role model for loads of little boys. It's gonna be great. And then when he goes back to save Adrian, and he tries, you know, and then when he actually stops fighting the Vulture and instead tries to save him because he can see his wings are gonna blow up, and then they do, and then he actually helps him get out of the fire and he saves him, you know, all that. Some amazing character development. It was so good, absolutely loved it. The end scene was so awesome. He seemed to heal very quickly at the end when he goes back to school. We don't know how long after the fight this has happened, so obviously it was long enough for him to completely heal, but what I want to know is like, what happened after that fight, because he was very badly beaten up. How did he explain that one to everyone? I would have liked to see that, but oh well. So yeah, he goes back to school, and we get that scene with the decathlon team and that sort of thing, and oh my goodness, Michelle, when she says that most of her friends call her MJ, John Watts, prior to the film coming out, there were loads of rumors that Zendaya could be playing MJ, and then everyone shut them down. Apparently she is MJ because she's playing Michelle Jones, but people call her MJ. I don't know how we didn't work that one out before, but yeah, when she said most of her friends call her MJ in the cinema, I gasped. I heard people behind me the first time I saw the film. People behind me groaned. They obviously weren't very happy with what they did, but yeah, I absolutely loved it. I was like, well played, John Watts, well played. So that was great. So yeah, what's interesting is if she's playing MJ, obviously MJ is one of Pete's love interests, so possibly in a future Spider-Man film, Michelle and Peter could end up becoming a thing. The way MJ looked at Peter at the end of that scene definitely made it look like she was somewhat interested, but we don't know for what reason. I loved Michelle in this film though. I loved her character. She was so relatable, you know, going to a party and eating toast, and was she really at that party? No one knows. She was so relatable, and what I found interesting was like at the start of the film she said she had no friends, then when they were in Washington she said that her friends were up there, and then at the end Ned was like, I thought you don't have any friends, and then she says I didn't. So she's obviously gotten friends during this film. She's now considering Peter and Ned and that her friends, and I think that's some awesome character development. And I absolutely love Zendaya. Zendaya has been my role model since I was like 11 years old. I absolutely loved Shake It Up. Rocky was my favorite character ever. That was one of my favorite shows. So I have grown up with the Zendaya, and seeing her in this big blockbuster film, in a Marvel film, it's so amazing. I'm so proud of her, and like I can't wait to see more of her. She's so incredible. But I've seen a lot of theories going around about Michelle as to why she seems so interested in Peter, because she went to detention even though she didn't have detention, and I mean she wanted to sketch people in crisis, but you know, still she was there, Pete was there, she was sat at the table Pete was sat in the canteen, she was at the party that Pete went to, and she obviously gave that very interested look to Peter at the end of the film. And a lot of people have been theorizing that actually MJ knows Peter is Spider-Man, and some people think it could be because MJ is actually an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., and I actually think a lot of these theories could be true. I think she does know that he's Spider-Man, whether she's worked it out herself or she is part of S.H.I.E.L.D. or something. I think one possible theory that would be quite cool is that she's actually related to Nick Fury. She could be his niece race or something, and then through that he's kind of set her up as an agent, and she's got like spy training and stuff, and she could be spying on Pete and that sort of thing. So I think her character is definitely hiding something, and she's definitely interesting, and I cannot wait to see her in future Spider-Man films. But yeah, so then Happy shows up at the school to talk to Peter. Now, I don't know about anyone else, but I find Happy so annoying in this film. Like, he keeps ignoring Pete and that sort of thing. He's really annoying. I've never liked his character. That's just me. Might be an unpopular opinion. If it is, I'm sorry, but I didn't really enjoy having Happy in this film, but it did still work and it was quite cool. But anyway, Pete gets taken to the Avengers compound and he meets Tony Stark again, and they talk, and then Tony shows him the Iron Spider suit. We've got the Iron Spider suit. It does look different to in the comics, but it still looks like the Iron Spider suit, and we're gonna get it in Infinity War, and I am so hyped to see what it does. I'm really hoping it has the pincers that the Iron Spider suit has in the comics. That would be so cool. So I cannot wait to see this suit. But obviously Tony offers him a place on the Avengers, which Pete then does end up turning down, which I think, again, character development. I love me some good character development, and that said a lot about his character, and he wanted to be a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, so that was very cool. But it'll be interesting to see him eventually join the Avengers in Infinity War. That'll be interesting. Also, in that scene there was a little bit where Tony had a ring, obviously for Pepper, so they're kind of hinting and teasing at Tony proposing to Pepper. Maybe that'll happen in a future film, unless Tony dies in Avengers 3 or 4. But then we get the last scene of the film where Aunt May finds out that Peter is Spider-Man. Oh my goodness, that was the funniest thing ever, when she's just like, what the fuck? And then it cuts to the credits. That was so funny, but that's also going to be very interesting. So the fact that Aunt May now knows, how is Pete going to explain that one? But again, I guess we'll find out about that in Infinity War, because Infinity War takes place 2 years after Civil War, so it'll be about 2 years just under after Homecoming. So it'll definitely be very interesting to see how that has affected Pete's life, if it has. I mean, in the Ultimate Spider-Man TV show, when Aunt May finds out, or when Pete tells her, turns out she'd already worked it out herself, so that could be the case in the MCU. Maybe she already knew. But it will definitely be interesting to see how that changes things. And yeah, then we just have the mid and end credit scene. The mid credit scene was at the prison, and we see Adrian Toomes talking to the guy who played the Scorpion. He says that there's a rumor going around that Adrian knows who Spider-Man is, and Adrian denies it. He says, if I knew, he'd be dead. Now this could mean two things. One, Adrian is actually kind of paying Pete back for Pete saving him by keeping his identity a secret to keep him safe, or he's keeping it a secret so that he can kill Pete himself. It's one of two ways. Hopefully it's the first one, but we'll have to find out. And then the end credit scene. Oh, I feel trolled. I mean, I went and saw the film 5 times, and every single time I saw it, bar one, I did stay for the end credit scene purely so that I could see the reaction of the audience. And every time I stayed for the end credit scene, the reaction to the audience, there were sighs, there were laughs, there were groans. It was absolutely hilarious. So we got trolled. The end credit scene was just Captain America giving us a lesson on patience. Well played, John Watts, well played. Now the final point I have to make in my notes about this film is, in the trailer for Spider-Man Homecoming, we got a scene or a clip that showed Peter and Liz kissing. Where was that in the film? It wasn't in the film, which is very interesting. So they filmed a kiss scene. You know, was there originally going to be this kiss in the film? If so, when, how, why? It looked like it was at the Homecoming. You know, so did they film it originally planning to have this kiss in the film, or did they film it purely to put it in the trailer to troll us? Because apparently John Watts likes to troll us with the whole end credit scene and the MJ thing. It wouldn't shock me if that's exactly why he actually filmed this kiss scene, just to troll us. But overall, I absolutely loved this film so much. Like, definitely one of my favorite MCU films. I think I prefer Winter Soldier, but that's partially because that film has a lot of meaning to me. Spider-Man Homecoming, definitely up there with my favorite MCU films, favorite all-time films. I saw it in the cinema 5 times. I have it on DVD. Absolutely incredible. The whole cast are amazing. The film's amazing. It's just, oh, it was so good. Spider-Man is back. Tom Holland is definitely my favorite version of Spider-Man. He gets everything right, from all the jokes as Spider-Man to living a teenage life as Peter. It's absolutely perfect and amazing. And yeah, I absolutely love this film. So that was my review of it / spoiler talk. I hope you guys enjoyed. Comment down below what you thought. I'm sorry this review is so late, but I had to do one. But yeah, if you enjoyed, make sure to like, comment and subscribe and share, and I'll see you all in my next video. Goodbye!